Hi everyone! First, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here to share my story. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Cheyenne, a fourth-year graphic design and media screen studies major. I'm passionate about various social justice issues, and I recently joined Extinction Rebellion Boston. I was born in Dedham, Massachusetts, and I lived there until I was 7. One of my favorite things about living in Dedham was that my parents were dog groomers. They started out working in a grooming shop, and I would hang out with the dogs until their owners picked them up. Then they ventured into their own business, which was a mobile grooming van, which meant we could groom dogs all over the greater Boston area. This is where my love for animals stemmed, and it stuck with me ever since. And subconsciously, this is also where I found my passion for activism. Then my whole world shifted when I moved to Malaysia in 2006 to be with my mom's side of the family. I have to acknowledge my privilege here. I was able to experience the best of two sides of Malaysia. My favorite thing about living in Southeast Asia was definitely the food. I grew up eating at a street stall really near my apartment, and the sun would beat down on me as I sat with my aunt and uncle, and we watched the man toss this dough far above his head to make roti canai. However, I was also fortunate enough to attend an international school from 2nd grade until I graduated high school. For anyone who doesn't know what international school is like, it's a small bubble of a community full of expat families who move to and from countries every few years. I was one of maybe 10 to 13 students in my grade of about 150 who stayed for more than 10 years. Malaysia is a developing country by definition, but the capital city that I lived in was extremely metropolitan. So much so that expats could live in the shelter of multi-story air-conditioned shopping malls and never experience local culture. This privilege gave my school the means to instill being green in us from a very young age. We were the first school to be given the Green Flag Award of Eco Schools Malaysia. I learned about recycling, crush cans on the weekend to send to the recycling plant, and we were always taught to compost extra food waste after lunch. While I was lucky enough to grow up in this environment, Malaysia as a whole is not seen as an environmental leader. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of intersectional environmentalism. My story about recycling at school wasn't for nothing, but in order to understand intersectional environmentalism, we have to first talk about what it means to be intersectional. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw 30 years ago. Let me explain this concept by comparing it to an actual intersection. Crenshaw used this analogy to explain that policies exclude Black women because they face overlapping discrimination unique to them. If a Black woman is standing in the middle of this intersection and gets run over, it is neither because she is a woman nor because she is Black. This term is being used to describe the ways that race and gender are intertwined and therefore cannot be mutually exclusive when discussing policies about both demographics. This term can also be applied to demonstrate the ways in which feminism often excludes women of color. Recently, this term has evolved and is used outside of this context. I want to use intersectionality to illustrate the ways in which multiple social justice issues are all related to the climate crisis that we're facing. Loss of biodiversity in our forests is one of the direct causes of the 6th mass extinction. Consumerism, mass production, and the fast fashion industry are all huge contributors to air pollution and deforestation. These issues are connected by a network of webs, interlaced. The main concept I want to focus on is the intersectionality of racial justice and environmental justice. Let's start on a global scale. The US is the largest contributor to the Earth's total waste, and yet the blame is always thrown to Asia. For example, fingers are easily pointed to China for being a huge contributor to air pollution and being the world's largest plastic producer. However, the US produces the most plastic waste. Not only is blame thrown, the actual waste from America is also thrown to Asia. In 2018, Malaysia refused to accept 150 containers of waste from the United States, United Kingdom, France, and Canada. Since China banned the import of other nations' plastic waste, Malaysia has been a new target. In a very literal way, America can't even deal with its own trash, so we dump it to other countries. The strain on developing countries due to the climate crisis is directly being given to them from wealthy countries. In Vietnam, workers are paid $6.50 a day to strip off non-recyclable elements and sort what remains, translucent plastic in one pile and opaque in another. Much of this plastic waste is not even produced in Vietnam. So let's go back to my life in Malaysia. It was important for me to acknowledge my privilege because I didn't have to face this reality every day, even though it was happening in my own country. We lived in a bubble where we didn't have to acknowledge it. So what about in the US? Not only are wealthy countries shedding their waste problems to other countries, the US contribution to the climate crisis is directly impacting communities of color in America. This problem dates back to slavery. To clear land for farm owners, acres of land were cleared of their natural diverse forests. Systemic racism has made it impossible for communities of color to advocate for their living situations. So they are left with the only option to live next to chemical waste. They're more likely to have toxic facilities sited near them, less likely to receive adequate protection to prevent disasters, and less likely to get the kind of immediate response white communities get when emergencies occur. In 2015, residents of Flint, Michigan were bathing and drinking water contaminated with lead. Though the mostly black community had long been voicing concerns about the troubling quality of their drinking water, government officials assured them again and again that it was safe. This is an example of how systemic racism caused physical harm to a community of color via climate channels. Environmental justice cannot be achieved without intersectionality. One of Extinction Rebellion Boston's 4 demands is that we must have a just transition, which prioritizes the most vulnerable people and establishes indigenous sovereignty and remediation led by and for communities suffering environmental justice. The U.S. has declared to reduce its emissions by 26 to 28% relative to the 2005 levels by 2050. But 2050 is too late. The temperatures are rising fast. Does anyone want to talk about the summer weather last week? And the fossil fuel industry is not slowing down. Along with more dire policies, our leaders need to acknowledge that our current policies exclude communities of color, and that we need to start advocating them in the changes that we make. So after hearing about all of these dire situations, it's easy to feel helpless. The most common thought is, I'm just one person. What is my recycling really going to do for the world? But that's exactly why we are where we are. Yes, major corporations and industries are the main contributors to fossil fuels being released into the atmosphere. But your actions matter too. What we need to achieve is a collective understanding that we need to work together, and that's the only way we are going to slow the destruction of our planet. All right, it's shameless plug time. For an advanced writing class, I created a website called How to Save the World as a digestible resource for anyone who needs to understand the climate crisis. Sometimes it's hard to understand the actual gravity of the situation. We hear these vast numbers about how many species are becoming endangered or how many acres of land are burned in the California forest fires. While it should, sometimes these statistics still don't resonate with people since they don't see how the crisis affects them as an individual. I attempt to break this down to apply the situation to anyone's daily life. I provide easy substitutes to make, a few influencers of movements to follow on social media, and ways to get involved. Not only is it important to recognize the steps you can take in your daily life, but to recognize that climate justice cannot be achieved without racial justice and vice versa. I understand that this is a lot, so let me break it down to 4 easy things that you can do today. First, make those easy swaps. Check the recycling labels under everything you consume to see if it can be recycled. If you don't already, start recycling at home. The biggest problem is that trash gets mixed in with the recyclables, so none of them end up being recycled. Second, learn as much as you can. As I'm sure you all know, social media has surged with educational slide decks and resources to help start your research. But don't let it stop on social media. Do those Google searches and follow through with your information. Third, discuss these issues with anyone you know. Talk to your roommates about having a more sustainable household and using products that don't harm yourself or the environment. Lastly, and most importantly, forgive yourself. It's impossible to be perfect when trying to live sustainably. The amounts of times I forgot my reusable metal boba straw is embarrassing, but life goes on and you can only try to better yourself. Be patient with the process and make these small changes every now and then, and take a breath of fresh air to remember what we're trying to save. Follow these resources to get started on your intersectional environmentalist journey today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope everyone is staying safe. Peace, love, and hug your pets or your plushies.